Welcome to this tutorial on programming the Economiser electric radiators, available from Electric Heating Expert, using the built-in touch-sensitive control and display panel. These radiators can also be controlled and monitored via a smartphone app, but this video tutorial is devoted to using the built-in control and display panel only. Some of the details of its operation depend on something called advanced options. Initially, we'll look at the operation with all these advanced options set to their default settings, and we'll look at what each of these advanced options does and the effect of changing them later. When plugged in, the radiator will be in one of two states: the standby state, which we can think of as the off state, or the active state, which we can think of as the on state, in which the radiator is controlling the room temperature to a value specified by the thermostat. In the active state, the heater is not necessarily on continuously, but the radiator will switch the heater on until the temperature reaches the value specified by the thermostat, and then maintain that temperature by switching the heater off and on as required. The active state itself has two modes of operation: manual mode or automatic mode, i.e. programmed mode. There's also something called temporary manual mode, and we'll look at each of these operating modes later. Let's look first of all at how we know which state the radiator is in, i.e. the standby or off state, or the active or on state. When in the standby state, the display will show only a power icon illuminated dimly at the bottom left of the screen. When in the active state, the display will depend upon the setting of one of the advanced options. By default, the display will show the current room temperature brightly when in the active mode, along with a thermometer symbol indicating that the numeric display is showing the current room temperature. One of the advanced options, and we'll see how to change it later, allows us to change what we normally see when the radiator is in the active state. We can set it so that instead of showing the room temperature brightly, it shows the room temperature a lot more dimly instead. Or alternatively, it can be programmed so that when in the active state, there is nothing illuminated on the display at all until you press it to make the display active. And we'll look at that in detail later as well. That can be very useful, for example in a bedroom where an illuminated display could be a distraction. Just to summarise then, if the display is showing only a power indicator at the bottom left of the display, then the radiator is in the standby state. If it's blank, and plugged in of course, or showing the current room temperature only, then it's in the active state. And if you remember that we mentioned in the active state the heater isn't on continuously, it's only on until the current room temperature reaches the value set by the thermostat. And if the heating is on, then we see an icon with 4 squiggly lines on the display as well. When the temperature reaches the thermostat setting, those squiggly line icons will be extinguished. When we plug in the radiator, if it's in the standby mode, then when we first apply power, the display will illuminate all the elements and then switch off and just show the power icon, the power indicator, dimly in the lower left corner. If the radiator is in the default mode, that is with the thermostat switched on, then when we first apply power, again it will illuminate all the display elements momentarily. It'll then display the temperature, the current room temperature, with a few icons above and below the display, and then those additional icons will disappear and it will show the room temperature only. Okay, let's take a closer look at the display elements on the control panel display. First of all, we have a main numeric display, which is a 4-digit display, 2 larger digits and 2 smaller digits to the right. This display is used to indicate a number of things, including the current room temperature, the thermostat setting, and the current time of day, depending on what mode the radiator's in. We'll look at the detail of that later in the video. We also have an auxiliary numeric display, which is just a single digit toward the top of the display. We have 4 areas of the display, 4 parts of the display which are touch sensitive. Let's call them buttons. First of all, we have a power button at the lower left of the display. We have a button that looks like 9 dots in a grid arrangement. Let's call that the menu button. We have an up arrow button, and we have a down arrow button. Also, we have some areas of the display. The remaining areas of the display are all just indicators, that is, they're not touch sensitive at all. So only the areas circled in red are actually controls. They're the only areas that you can actually press to do stuff. The rest of the icons, the rest of the indicators on the display are just that, indicators. So this one that looks like a letter A with an arrow above and below it, that's the auto mode indicator, and that illuminates when the radiator is in the programmed mode, such that it's changing the temperature at different times of the day automatically according to the program setting. Just to the right of that we have an indicator which looks like a hand with a pointing finger. That's the manual mode indicator, and when that's illuminated, that means that you can just set the desired temperature by moving the up and down arrow buttons, and it will just work to that temperature, no programming at all. We have an indicator which looks like a thermometer, and when that's indicated, when that's illuminated, that means that the main numeric display is indicating the current room temperature. Just above that we have an indicator which has the word set. When that's illuminated, that means that the main numeric display is indicating the thermostat setting. Just to clarify those terms, the thermometer is the thing which measures the current room temperature, and the thermostat is the thing which determines the desired or target temperature for the radiator to try to get to, the room to. Just here we have an indicator which looks like 4 squiggly lines. When that's illuminated, it means the heater is currently on. When the temperature of the room reaches the thermostat temperature, of course, the heater will switch off and those squiggly line icons will disappear. So whenever those 4 icons are, whenever that icon with the 4 squiggly lines is illuminated, that means the heater is currently on and it's heating the room up. This icon that looks like a letter P indicates the current program period. Now the radiator can be programmed so that it has up to 6 separate periods during the day, each of which can be programmed to have a different start time and stop time, and each of which can be programmed to have a different target temperature, a different thermostat setting for each of the defined 6 periods during the day. Now that P indicator, when that's illuminated in conjunction with the auxiliary numeric display, indicates what period of the day we're currently in. So for example, if we're in period 2, the P will be illuminated and the auxiliary numeric display will indicate the number 2. This icon here looks a little bit like a calendar. That's the time setting indicator. That illuminates whenever you're currently setting the device to set the clock, to set the current time of day. The user manual actually identifies that as the open window indicator, but I think that could be an error because this icon here, which looks more like an open window with 2 side windows open, look, I believe that's the open window indicator, and the one that we looked at a moment ago, contrary to what the user manual says, that's not the open window indicator, that's the time setting indicator, one that looks like a calendar. We also have this icon that looks like a a bag, a little hand carry suitcase. That's the holiday mode indicator. We'll look at the holiday mode setting later in the video as well. This indicator, which looks like a snowflake, is the frost indicator. This one that looks like a padlock is the child lock indicator. And finally we have these two icons which represent the Wi-Fi connections to the device. We won't be looking in any great detail at those in this video because I'd like to concentrate in this video on using the control panel manually. Okay, so we have a standby state for the radiator and we have an active state for the radiator. Now, the normal display in the standby state is simply an indication of the power icon displayed dimly at the lower left. The normal display in the active state is going to be either the temperature, the current room temperature, displayed either brightly or displayed more dimly, or a completely blank display depending on the setting of one of the advanced options. If we press the screen, the touch screen, in the position of the up or down arrow, then we move the display into what's called, well, I'll call it the extended display mode, in which the power button is displayed more brightly and the other active areas of the screen, the up and down arrow button and the menu button, are also displayed. If you don't press any of those buttons within about 10 seconds, then the display will drop back into the normal display mode. If you do a short press on the power button within that 10 seconds, it's going to switch the radiator into the active state. And the active state, you remember, can have one of two operating modes. It can either be in the manual mode, which would be indicated by the hand icon with the pointing finger, or it can be in the automatic mode, which would be represented by the A icon, and also the P and a number on the auxiliary numeric display would be indicated, indicating which of the programmed timing periods it's currently in. Again, if you don't press anything when you're in that mode within about 10 seconds, and if you don't press any of the buttons, it's going to drop back into the active state's normal display mode. But we can bring it back into the extended display mode by pressing the screen in one of the positions of the up or down arrow button. The short press on the menu button will toggle between the two modes, either the manual mode or the automatic mode. A long press on the power button when you're in the active state will effectively switch the radiator off, moving it back into the standby state, which we can also think of as the off state. If we press the up or down arrow button when the display is in the extended mode and we're in the active state, then the thermometer icon right here will change into the word set, which means that the main numeric display is no longer displaying the current room temperature, but it's displaying the target temperature set by the thermostat, and we can change that target temperature by pressing the up and down arrow buttons. If we don't press any buttons while we're in this thermostat setting mode, then within 10 seconds it'll drop back into the extended display mode showing the current room temperature. Likewise, if we press the up or down arrow button when we're in automatic mode, again the thermometer icon will change to a set icon and the display of the current room temperature will change to a display of the target thermostat temperature. And if we start pressing the up or down arrow buttons in this mode, then the automatic icon and the manual icon will come on simultaneously, and what this indicates is that you've gone into something called temporary manual mode, which means that just for this particular occasion, on this particular time period, we're overriding the programmed thermostat setting with a setting that you determine by pressing these up and down arrow buttons. Again, if you don't press anything while you're in that mode, within 10 seconds or so it's going to drop back into the mode where it's indicating the current room temperature on the main numeric display. The menu button, if we do a long press of the menu button when we're in the standby state, that allows us to access these advanced options that we spoke briefly about. And if we do a long press of the menu button when we're in the active state, that allows us to access the timing options, which include setting the current time of day on the internal clock, setting up the programming of the thermostat temperatures for the different periods of the day, or setting up something called holiday mode. A short press of the power button in this state will temporarily display the current time of day. Let's set the current time of day on the internal clock. Right now it's about 4:20 in the afternoon. So to set the time of day on the clock, we need to activate the display just by pressing just below and then holding this menu icon for a few seconds until it displays menu option number 1. The other options on here are for setting the programming of the timing and holiday mode, but we want menu option number 1. Once menu option number 1 is selected, a short press on there will enable us to set the clock. First of all, we set the minutes, and we said it's about 4:20, so let's increase this minutes to a value of 20. Once that's done, we do another short press and it allows us to set the hours. So 4 o'clock in the afternoon is 16:20. A short press again allows us to set the day. 1 is generally used for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. A final press on there and the clock is set. We can find out the clock setting by a short press on there. You see it's 16:20 on day 7. And then after a few seconds it will drop back and show the current room temperature. Let's now program the thermostat times, and we can do that again by making sure that we're in the default controlling mode. We can wake the display, we can press this menu button for a few seconds until the menu options appear. Now instead of 01, which we used for setting the clock, we're now going to go to option 2. Once we select option 2 and the A icon flashes, we can press this menu icon again, and it's asking us what do we want the start time for period 1 to be. Let's say we want the start time for period 1 at exactly midnight, and at midnight, first of all, it asks us the hours for the start time. So let's start at 0, 0, and we want the temperature to be 20 degrees. Press again, and the next period, let's say the next period, we want it to be at 4 AM. We want it to go down to 4 hours and 0 minutes. Period 2, we want it to go down to a temperature of 15 degrees. Press it again. It asks us for period 3. Let's say period 3 we want to start at 8:30, and we want it to come back to, so 8:30, we want it to come back to maybe 20 degrees. Say the next period is 9:30, and we want it to go down to 10 degrees because maybe we're out. And then let's say we want it to come back on at the next period to start at 1800 hours, and we'll bring it back to 20 degrees at that time. And then maybe at 11 o'clock it can go down to 15 degrees again. Now it's going to go back round to 1 again. The reason for that is because this is currently in what's called the 5+2 settings, which gives us the option of setting a different set of programs for the 2 days of the week, Saturday and Sunday. So let's just go and put some numbers in here. 6 o'clock, we want it to go to 17 degrees. 8 o'clock, we want it to go to 18 degrees. 11:30 or 11, say we want 11:45. We want it to be 15 degrees. 13. 15. We want it to be 22 degrees, and 5 o'clock in the afternoon we want it to be I don't know, let's say 20 degrees again, and then 10 o'clock at night we want it to go to 15 degrees. So a final press is now programmed the 2 sets of times, one for the first 5 days and one for the other 2 days. Let's take a look at the holiday mode programming. Timing items are always programmed while we're in the active mode, so let's press the menu setting while we're in the active mode, and we want not item 1 because that's for setting current time of day, not item 2 because that's for setting the program periods, we want item 3. And the holiday mode icon flashes, so let's accept that. How many days are we going to be on holiday for? Let's say 10 days. And what temperature do we want during that period? Let's say 10 degrees. Okay, and it's then in holiday mode. It will then try to keep the temperature at 10 degrees, or no higher than 10 degrees, no lower than 10 degrees, for that period. And if we press to make the display active, we can see it's in holiday mode. To get back into manual mode, we just press this one, press it again, it goes into automatic mode, and then it just toggles between successive presses, then toggle between automatic mode and manual mode. It only goes back into holiday mode again if you actually do what we did just then. Look, press the menu, go to menu option 3, tell it how many days. Let's say we're just going on holiday for 5 days this time, and we want the temperature during that time to be 10 degrees, and it'll stay on that. It's now in holiday mode, and it will stay in holiday mode until we press this again. It'll go to manual, it'll go to automatic, and then successive presses will just switch between manual and automatic. While the radiator is in the active state, we can display the current time and day of the week simply by, first of all, just pressing the up arrow or down arrow button to bring the display into the extended state. And you can see now that in addition to all of the buttons becoming visible, the power button, the menu button and the up and down arrow buttons, also we now see the indicator showing whether we're in manual or automatic mode. In this case we're in manual mode, and also the thermometer icon indicating that the display is currently showing the current room temperature. If we then go ahead and make a short press of the power button, the display, the main numeric display, will start to show the current time of day, in this case 11:57, and the auxiliary display at the top of the display, just to the left of the power of the up arrow button, will display which day of the week it is, in this case day number 7. We also see just to the left of that auxiliary display the calendar icon or time setting icon. Now after a few seconds that time display will disappear and the display will revert back to the display, the standard display for the active mode, whether you have that set to displaying temperature brightly, displaying temperature dimly, or a blank display. So, adjusting the thermostat setting while the radiator is in the manual mode. First of all, we need to just press in the position of the up or down arrow button just above or below the main numeric display, which will put the display into the extended mode, showing the up and down arrow buttons and the power and menu buttons, along with the manual mode indicator, confirming that we are in fact in manual mode. And then if we press the up or down arrow button again, then the main numeric display will change from indicating the current room temperature to indicating the current setting of the thermostat, and the thermometer icon will change to a set icon. If we don't press anything for a few seconds, then it will drop back into the current temperature display. So let's press the up or down arrow button again to go back into the temperature setting mode, and remember that it was indicating the current thermostat setting was 9 degrees, which is below the current room temperature of 10 degrees, 10.5 degrees. That's why the heating isn't currently on, that's why the squiggly line icon is not illuminated. So if we increase the thermostat setting to, let's say, 15 degrees, then after a moment the heater will actually come on, because the current temperature is now below the target thermostat temperature, and the squiggly line icon will come on to indicate that the heating is now on. After a few more seconds, the main numeric display will revert from showing the thermostat target temperature to the actual current room temperature, as indicated by the icon set changing back to a thermometer icon. And we're in manual mode. Okay, to change to automatic mode, we're in period 2. So period 2 is currently 10.5 degrees. And because we're set at 10 degrees for this period, we're actually above the thermostat temperature, so the temperature is not on. If it's a bit low, what we can do is, you see, we can wake the display and temporarily change the setting by pressing this. Let's say we want to go up to 15 degrees. because it's a bit cold at the moment. So it temporarily overrides the automatic mode, and in this mode the heater comes on, you see, because we've changed the setting to 15 degrees, and the automatic symbol and the manual symbol are both on together, indicating that we are in temporary manual mode. Now that temporary manual mode will only stay until we get to the next period, which is set to start at 12 o'clock. Now currently we're at 11:58, so at 12 o'clock we'll expect it to change from the temporary manual mode that we've set over back to the automatic mode. So let's just wait a couple of minutes and see if that happens. It's gone into period 3 now, look. It's 12 o'clock. And let's just see, it's gone back into automatic mode. So once it gets onto the next programmed period, the mode goes back to the automatic mode. If it was originally in automatic mode and you go into temporary manual mode, it'll switch back to automatic mode when the next period comes into force. Now, let's say that you want to go into warming it up and override it. Anyway, the best thing to do would be to, instead of going into manual mode, instead of going into temporary manual mode by just changing the temperature while you're in automatic mode, instead switch over to manual mode and then set the temperature what you want. Now, right now, the temperature is set to 9 degrees, so that's why the heating is off. There's no squiggly lines. So if we increased that to, say, 15 degrees, you'll see that the heating will come on, because now the target temperature, which we can see just by momentarily pressing that, is set to 15. Let's take a look at the advanced options. Now, the advanced options are accessed when the radiator is in the standby mode. So in the standby mode, indicated by the power icon in the bottom left corner, if we just bring the display into the active state, just by pressing here, we can then press and hold the menu button for a few seconds, and then we have access to the advanced options. We currently are looking at advanced option number 1. This smaller part of the numeric display indicates the menu option item number, and the menu option advanced option number 1 represents, according to the manual, temperature sensor calibration. That seems to have a default value of -1, and it can be changed anywhere between -9 and a maximum value of +9. So let's just set it back to the default of -1. That allows the temperature to be adjusted. The next option, and we cycle through the different advanced options by a short press on this button here. So advanced option number 2 is described in the manual as the temperature return difference. At this time I don't know what that means, so we'll come back to that at an update of the video when I do know what it means. Advanced option number 3, let's look at the values actually of advanced option number 2. It can be set anywhere between 0.5 and a maximum value of 2.5. and the default value is 1. Advanced option number 3 is described in the manual as the external sensor control return difference. That has a value of, let's see, put 2 by default, and it can be varied anywhere between 1 and 9. Again, that's something that I don't know exactly what it means. In fact, I don't know at all what it means, so we'll come back to that one on an update of the video when we do know. Advanced option number 4 has values as a default value of N1, and the other potential values are N2 and N3. Let's put it back to the default of N1. This is described in the manual. The function is choose sensor, and the parameter options are N1 is the inner sensor, N2 is the external sensor, and N3 is described as inner sensor for temperature controlling, external sensor for high temperature protection. Again, I have no idea what that one means. We're not doing very well so far with these advanced options, are we? As far as I'm aware, there's only one sensor on the module. Oh look, it's gone back into the display. We've lost the settings because I've been taking too long talking about it. So let's go back into the advanced options and back to number 4 that we were talking about. As far as I'm aware, as I was saying, there's only one sensor, and that's at the bottom of the radiator, so I don't know what these different options are. Let's look at advanced option number 5, child lock. Values of 0 is half lock, and a value of 1 is full lock. So I guess that's just to stop kids from playing with the display. Advanced option number 6 is described as maximum temperature setting allowed. It has a default value of 45 and can be varied anywhere between 20 and 70. Advanced option number 7, minimum temperature setting allowed. That has a default value of 5 and can be varied anywhere between 1 and 10. Advanced option number 8 says minimum temperature. Default value 5 can be varied anywhere between 1 and 10. Now, I don't know what's the difference between minimum temperature, which is this advanced option number 8, and minimum temperature setting allowed, which is advanced option number 7. Advanced option number 9 is described as maximum temperature. Again, I don't know what's the difference between advanced option number 9, maximum temperature, and advanced option number 6, maximum temperature setting allowed. Let's go to advanced option number 10. This is one that I actually do know what it means. This is the behaviour after the mains power is turned on. And we looked at that earlier. No, we'll look at that later. And what this does is it defines what the radiator is going to do if you depower it and repower it. That is, unplug it and plug it back in again. If it has a value of 0, then it's going to come back on in the state that it was in before you depowered it. That is, if it was in the standby state, it'll come back in the standby state. If it was in the active state, it'll come back in the active state. A setting of 1 for advanced option number 10 will tell it to come back on in the standby state. So if you have that set to value 1, then regardless of whether it was in the active state or the standby state before you depowered it, when you power it back up again, it'll always revert to the standby state. And similarly, advanced option number 2 will make it always come back on in the active state. That is, if it was in the, regardless of whether it was in the standby state or the active state before you depowered it, when you power it back up, it'll revert to the active state. So let's just put that back to the default value of 0. And look at advanced option number 11. That's the programming mode. There are 3 values. 2 is the default value. 1 and 0 are alternative values. If you're in the default state of 2, then it allows you to set No, that's not the default state actually. The default state, the default state is 0 for this one. And if you're in this default state of 0, then when you do the programming for the thermostat times that it comes on, it allows you to set certain program values, times and thermostat settings for 5 days, which will be the same, and then 2 other days, which are days 6 and 7, will be different. That's useful if you want to have different programming for the weekend. If you have a value of 1, it allows the radiator to just have 1 day which is different, so 6 days will be the same. For example, if you work Monday through Saturday, you might want to set those days to be the same programming, and then Sunday, day 7, will be a different setting. If you use a value of 2 here, then all 7 days will be programmed the same. And that's the value that we're using here. We want all values the same. So I'm going to leave that in value 2, which is not the default state. That's 7 days programmed with the same times and temperatures. Advanced option number 12 is the standby, described as standby display. What that actually means is when it's in the active state, when the radiator is in the active state and the display is not in the extended mode, what will be displayed on the display? With a value of 2, the display will display the temperature brightly. With a value of 1, it will display the temperature dimly, and with a value of 0, the display will be blank until a button on the display is pressed. Let's leave it in that state for now. Advanced option number 13, open window. And the 2 settings, the 2 values are 2 dashes, which means the open window sensing is off, or on, which means the open window sensing is on. I've not investigated in detail how this works, so again that's something for an update of the video at a later date. Advanced option number 14 is described as temperature to trigger the open window sensor. Has the default value of 10 and can be set anywhere between 10 and 20. Advanced option number 15, open window running time. Default value is 10 minutes and can be set anywhere between 10 and 20 minutes. Advanced option 16 has values of 2, 1 or 0. 2 means key sound and alarm is on. 1 is key sound and 0 is no sound. So this just sets when you have beeps. Do you get beeps every time that you press a button? Do you get beeps every time it gives you some kind of alert? Or do you get beeps never? You can hear right now we've got beeps all the time. So let's leave that in the 2 value. Advanced option number 17 is called adaptive start. 2 dashes means the feature is turned off. The word on means the feature is turned on. Let's leave that in the default value. And finally, the last of the advanced options, number 18, according to the manual, it says this is a reset function. And the description is long press with a symbol of the menu button until the whole display resets. Doesn't make much sense at all, does it? Because the display is actually showing A0 or AO. So whether that means that you press something to reset everything, that's not very clear again. So you can always escape from the advanced options menu by pressing the power button, and as you can see it reverts to going out of that menu if you don't press any keys for a while. So let's just go back into the advanced options, and for example if I'm cycling through the advanced options and I decide that I've done all I need to do, I can just do a single press on the power button and it'll go back out of it, and then the display will go to the standard mode again. So that's just a quick run through of the advanced options, how to access them, and later in the video we'll now start looking at the detail of what each of those advanced options does as we learn what they do, because there's very little information in the manual. Okay, let's make the display active, and let's hold this down so that we go into the advanced menu options, and we want to go to advanced menu option number 10. When that's in 0, that means that the radiator will remember the previous state when it's unplugged and plugged back in again. So let's just see what that means by going out of the advanced settings. And you can see that currently it's in the standby mode. So if I depower the radiator by unplugging it and then plug it back in again, it will come back on in the standby mode. If I go into the active mode and now I switch it off and switch it back on again, it will come back on in the active mode. So let's now change that setting . Let's change this setting, so we're going to go back into advanced settings and we're going to go to advanced setting number 10 again, and we're now going to set it to value 1, and the value of 1 means it will always come back on in the standby mode. So if it's already in the standby mode, then I switch it off and switch it back on again, then as you'd expect it'll come back on in the standby mode. But now if I switch it to the active mode and now I switch it off and back on again, it will revert to the standby mode because it's programmed to always come back on in standby mode, where previously it was programmed to remember what state it was in before it was switched off. Let's now try the third option. And the third option for advanced option number 10 is a setting of 2. When it's in a setting of 2, it's programmed to always come back on in the active mode. So now even if you depower while it's in the standby mode and power it back up again, it will power back up in the active mode. And as you'd expect, if you depower when it's in the active mode and then repower, it will again come back on in the active mode. So 3 options then: it can come back on in the active mode always, it can come back on in the standby mode always, or it can come back on in the state that it was in before you depowered. Let's look at advanced option number 12, which tells the radiator what to display when you're in the active mode. Now the default is to display the current room temperature brightly. Let's go into the standby mode so that we can program the advanced options, and this time we want advanced option number 12. So let's go to advanced option number 12, and the current setting is 2. That tells it to display the temperature brightly. If we change this to a value of 1 and exit, then we'll see that when we go into the active mode, it'll display the temperature dimly. So that's a lot dimmer than it was before. Of course, when you press anywhere on the display or any of the active positions, the display will become bright again for a few seconds and then go dim again. Let's just go into the standby mode again so that we can program the advanced options. And let's go back to advanced option number 12 and let's set a value of 0. With a value of 0, after a few seconds we'll see the display. Well, we're actually in the standby mode now, so let's go into the active mode, and after being active for a few seconds the display will go completely blank. Now that's useful if you have the radiator in a bedroom and it's bothering you that it's distracting you to have the display illuminated. You can have the display programmed like this, so that unless you actually press anything to wake the display for a few seconds to see what the temperature is, normally the display will be completely blank. So let's just set that back again to the default setting, which is advanced option number 12, and we'll set that back to a value of 2. So that when we are in the active mode, after the icons have displayed for a few seconds, the temperature will remain displaying brightly.